I never know how to like introduce these things. I know I sound wild, but this is episode 8 of Vital Refinement Things I Learned in 2020. Let's get started. Things I learned in 2020. I have been straddling the fence in every part of my life. This is kind of piggybacking off Make Up Your Mind, episode 4 of Vital Refinement. If you haven't listened to it, go back and listen to it. But in that episode, I talked about how making up your mind is literally one of the, I guess it's like the top 3 best advice that I've ever received from someone. And making up your mind means you stand for something. You know what the best decision is for yourself. You know that you need to commit to something, and be disciplined for yourself in order for you to practice self love and self care. Go back to the episode and listen to it if you don't get what I'm saying. But this episode is similar to that because it's about straddling the fence. And we know when you straddle the fence, that means you ain't made up your mind. And this in particular that I'm going to talk about has to do with a lot that went down in 2020. Not that these things are new, but it was way more televised, made way more attention on it. So it made a very much larger impact for all the world and not just a particular community. This has to do with Black lives, the Black community, the things that we face living in this world. Okay? I was straddling the fence my whole life around this topic and many other topics, but I'm only going to talk about this topic because I grew up in a very diverse community with a lot of other races and other cultures. Well, we're all one human race, but that's the term that they like to use, right? And so I never want to ruffle feathers. I was afraid to correct people because I was like, I'm going to lose them as a friend. They're going to think I'm too serious. They don't think I'm always playing victim. They're going to think that, I hate them, when that wasn't the case. I just, like I said, from episode 6, I was operating out of fear of losing them in one way or another. But 2020 made me realize how important that part of my identity was and how important me staying silent was and me straddling the fence and being indifferent and neutral about so many things. And it took 2020 and the events that occurred in 2020 involving people who are part of my community that looked like me for me to realize how much I was indirectly choosing the other side. Not saying there's only 2 sides to everything, but how much I was not contributing. And I'm not saying there's different values to what contributing looks like, whether that's posting on social media or you're physically out there in a march or you're, creating some type of foundation or organization or writing policy or trying to push new policy. Like, I feel like all of that is supported and all of it has value. But for me, in particular, personally, I felt like, yeah, I can post on social media, which is good because, a lot of people don't post about those things typically on social media until something in the news comes out, and then you're like, oh, I see what your opinion is now. But on a regular average day, people are not going to know what your views are on certain topics unless you actually are determined for them to know. They may know what your outfit of the day is. They may know what type of music you like to listen to. They may know about the job that you hate working at. They may know who you're dating, how many kids you got, what new shoes you just copped. Like, they may know these things, but they may not know what your values are, what your beliefs are, where you stand. And I love that. I hated talking about politics. I hated talking about injustices. I hated talk. It just was. I'm a person who would voice conflict, so it was easier for me to just only post when it was very vague, or it was very much about equity and not so much about the the big pitch, the big problem, the major problem, right? So it wasn't until 2020 where I found my voice in that, and I found out where I stood, and I found out that I no longer want to straddle the fence. And it took a relationship um, to help teach me that as well. A relationship that had already had a bit of toxic um, interactions around race, from our childhood into our adulthood. Things that came up whenever I would be with that person and their family that made me uncomfortable, whether it's the way they said something or the way they described something. Like microaggressions, or using a certain word, or um, using a word to describe me. Like, there's different things like that that I never was comfortable with, but I just, like I said earlier, just feared losing them or feared causing conflict. And so I just didn't say anything, or I just try to shrug it off, laugh it off, say, oh yeah, it's fine, it doesn't bother me, you guys are like family, like things like that. And then, but when all this other stuff coming up, and then the same person is just like, not, just doesn't get it, just doesn't understand, just doesn't connect, and doesn't want to. They don't want to, they didn't want to understand where I was coming from, how it affected me. They were very defensive. They were very one-sided, and amongst other things. And so it took, the things that was happening in 2020 in general, but in particular that relationship, for me to realize, like, dang, like, I really hadn't been doing my part in this way, in this community that I belong in, that I belong to. So that's when I found out, I've been straddling fists in other ways in my life, like whether it's spiritually or just different stuff in my life. And I was just like, no, I don't want to be like this. I want to make up my mind. I want to commit to something, and I want to stand for something. And so that's the eighth thing that I learned in 2020, that I was a fence straddler. And I it wasn't um I wasn't standing for anything, or very much. I guess I can say I wasn't standing for very much, and I decided I wanted to change that, and I found out what I wanted to stand for in that particular area. Um, Things may change over time, like I said in previous episodes. People change their mind, they learn something new, they have more evidence for something, and of course you're allowed to change your mind, but there are just certain things you choose to stand for always. And so I decided to stand with my people, that understand me and can identify with my personal experiences. And there's other things in my life that I'm still working on and trying to figure out what I want to stand for. But yes, that's what I learned in 2020. I'm pretty sure a lot of us can relate to this lesson, or this thing you learned during that time. I mean, how could you not question yourself, or like reflect on some things around this topic? I hope that you enjoyed enjoy listening to this. I hope that you found it relative. Please like, give a comment, um, share it with someone if you feel like it's relative to them. And like I mentioned before, like I really appreciate you listening. This is really an outlet for me to express myself. And so you listening is just a bonus, and I am very grateful. And I just want you to have a blessed life. I pray that you stay safe and healthy and continue listening to Vital Refinement. All right, take care, and we'll talk next time.